now. My name is Jessie Ebersol. I'm the WATESOL president. Welcome all of you. It's my pleasure to introduce our invited speaker, Dr. Robin Barr, for her presentation titled The Invisible Student, Identifying and Accommodating the Low Literacy Learner. Dr. Robin Barr has been Linguist-in-Residence at American University for 25 years and has been teaching reading to adult English speakers with dyslexia and to English language learners with reading problems at the Washington Literacy Center for 8 years. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Robin Barr.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm going to take a poll, but if you could either show yourself or put a hand up, or thumbs up or thumbs down. I'd like to know how many of you. Let me ask. The first question is, how many of you always use a textbook with your beginning students? Tiffany says no. Holly says no. Anybody say yes? Amy says yes. Okay, I'm not getting answers from everybody. Okay, so in programs that I've looked at, a lot of people, a lot of the curriculum says, okay, this is the textbook. You start with the textbook and everybody uses the textbook. Right. Next question. How many of you have discovered that a certain percentage of your students has what you could call, I don't know, you could say that they're falling between the cracks, or that there's a failure to thrive or something like that. They come to class, they seem engaged, they're enjoying it, they participate, and they make no progress at all on the exams. That sound familiar? Okay. And I think that some of these students would be better served by a different approach that addresses their literacy issues directly. Okay, so I'm just going to put it right out there. I'm saying that there are some students who don't go along with the rest of the herd, don't go along with the rest of the class in developing literacy, or being able to use the textbook, or being able to get from reading in their own language to reading in English, or whatever. So who are these people? How can we help them? What's going on with it? And let me share the screen. See where we were. Yeah. Okay. So let me turn this into slideshow. Do that. There we go. So the invisible student, right? That's who I'm talking about. These are students. They don't make trouble in class. We love having them in class. They love us. They come back every year, after year after year after year. Some 10 years in a row in basic 1. Okay, but they never seem to get anywhere. This is why are they stuck? What's going on here? Why is it that they can't function outside of the English class? There's something going on, and I just want to say that what I'm saying here is nothing terribly new. I've been presenting about this population at WATESOL for several years now, maybe 5 years. And I've addressed, I guess I've addressed at least 2 of the types already in previous WATESOL presentations. But when Jessie invited me to come talk, I thought, well, maybe I could just put it all together if you haven't seen some of my previous presentations, or just sort of summing up the what I see as the landscape here for your own purposes, so that you can see what you can identify what's going on in your own class, and maybe decide what to do with your own students. Okay, so I work at the Washington Literacy Center, and I was originally trained. Oh, go back. Okay, I was originally trained to deal with adult English speakers with dyslexia. So I was trained in the Wilson method, and but I have also been teaching at American University as a linguist-in-residence in their TESOL program. So I have both TESOL experience, teaching English experience, and dyslexia experience. When this is before your time, Jesse, but Washington English Center, which is our local, I guess you could say a very well respected English language teaching program that uses volunteers as teachers, but also a lot of people from the American University TESOL program as tutors and so forth. They said, we have these people who just don't get anywhere. We think maybe it's a reading problem. We're trying to do some kind of pre-basic or pre-reading class where we teach them the alphabet in advance, but that's not, they just don't seem to be getting anywhere. I don't know what's going on. So we've been collaborating with Washington English Center, Washington Literacy Center, have been collaborating for about 5 years. They send us students who seem to be stuck and need extra help with reading their spoken English, or their acquisition of English in general is far beyond their ability to read and write. So there's a disparity there, and we're trying to figure out what it is. And I have to say, unfortunately, the last 2 years or last year and a half with COVID, we have not been able to continue this program. But I'm talking about the kinds of behaviors and results I observed before COVID. So 5 years before COVID. So WEC noticed that some students were not making progress through the class levels. They seem motivated, they're attentive, they take notes all the time. Their oral English improves somewhat, but they can't pass the test. The CASAS stays at the floor level. They can't read aloud in class. They have trouble filling out registration forms. They have trouble writing their name and address. What's going on here? Is there a pattern? And when you compare the students in the program who advance at the expected rate to the students who are failing to thrive, even though they're trying hard, we do find some differences. You can't say it's dispositive, but there are tendencies. So most of the students who seem to be having no trouble moving into English reading are literate in their native language and familiar with the Latin alphabet in their own language. So, for example, Spanish speakers are already advanced because they understand not just the letters, but they understand the sound symbol correspondences. They know how to decode words if they can already read in Spanish, say. A lot of them also have some formal education. They know what reading is, what it's for. They know what a book is. They know how to read in I guess you could say in sequences of words, either left to right or right to left, depending on what language you're dealing with. But they're familiar with how to approach a page. Okay, the students who are having trouble are often those either who have interrupted education or no formal education. Maybe their writing system is not Roman, so they have to start learning the Roman alphabet before they can even start to decode English. So Arabic, Thai, Japanese, Mandarin, anything that doesn't use the English alphabet, and especially any language that doesn't use an alphabetic system. So any language, maybe like Japanese, where you might have both syllables indicating a symbol and a symbol that indicates a whole word, and that all kinds of mixed types of writing, but not necessarily alphabetic. We also don't know if some of these students have some kind of undiagnosed reading problem, like a learning disability, like dyslexia. Some of these students have English pronunciation that is almost unintelligible. So it's very, very, very difficult to understand them. But their oral English, or at least I should say their communication in English tends to be above their reading level, right? So how can we better serve these students is the question here. So I'm finding three types that are falling through the cracks here that aren't adequately served by the classes that they're in, no matter how many times they repeat them, right? So the first type is what you would expect in English reading as well. So somebody with dyslexia, somebody with some other kind of a learning issue. We've had some students that have brain trauma that they told us about later. Said, oh, okay, well, that explains a lot. If you've had a head injury, now I see why you're having issues with this. So how do you detect it? Well, again, this is always a may and might, but these are tendencies. So maybe they have reading problems in their native language. So if I say, well, can you read in Arabic? And they say, well, maybe, sort of, do they have some formal education? Some of them do. Are they familiar with the Latin alphabet? Some of them are. And in general, their spoken language level is higher than their reading level. So their reading level lags behind, and probably there's some kind of brain issue, some kind of learning disability. The biggest issue here is that it says undiagnosed, unless they were diagnosed with dyslexia in their native language, which is unlikely. It's very difficult to try to diagnose dyslexia in a language that they don't know, right? I've tried to have to develop language independent tests involving, you colored blocks and you have nonsense words, and so I mean it can be done, but by the time you go through all that, it turns out that it may not even make a difference what the problem is, as long as they're in this difficult class. But that's one of the possible sources of the problem. The second type that we've identified is students who have pronunciation problems. And this is very interesting because I also have some native speakers who have speech difficulties who have very similar problems. The problem is that they're difficult to understand, even if they're literate in their native language and are able to decode the Latin alphabet. Their native language has a phonology that is so different from English that it distorts their pronunciation of English so much so that they cannot recognize the words that they're decoding. And I'll give you some examples of that later. So for these students, their reading level is probably higher than their speaking level. They may recognize words, they may be able to do connected text, but they have trouble identifying what each word is, because when they say it aloud, it doesn't sound like the English word that they're familiar with. So that's type 2. The third type is I was just before this presentation, I was talking to Helene Marshall, who gave a talk on this very topic or related topic earlier today about students who have interrupted or no formal education. They don't understand. They have, I would say, they have low literacy awareness. They're not literate in their native language. They don't understand what reading is for, I guess, is what I have to say. They don't, there's a disconnect between their speech and then reading. They don't realize that the letters talk, right? So they learn the alphabet, okay. They learn how to decode the letters and decode the words. They may be writing everything down that appears on the board or that they see in their book, but it doesn't mean anything. Their reading and writing is not meaningful. They don't understand that it's the same as talking. So it's a conceptual problem. I guess I would have to say it's we're assuming that people understand that writing is written speech, but I think that these students who are coming from very different cultures and are not familiar with the literacy of the Western culture that they've landed in, don't really see why they need reading, except that they know they need it for the citizenship test or because everybody here reads, but they're not sure what it's for. What does it get them? Okay, a quick tour through the brain. I'm just going to show you what's going on in the brain as a way of distinguishing these three types of reading issues, because I always think of things as how they affect the brain. But in general, we're looking at the brain right now from the top down, and the front is on the where it says anterior, and the back is posterior. The areas we're going to be mostly concerned with are the speech area over here on the left side. You may know this as Broca's area. The vision area, which is in the occipital lobe, in the back of the brain. And this area here, which is sometimes called the logical mathematical intelligence. So rational symbolic thought, putting things in sequence, analyzing things, taking things apart into small pieces. That's a part that's actually more involved in reading than you might think. Also in the brain, we have recognition of faces and spatial relationships. Visual intelligence is over on the right side, and memory for shapes is over on the right side. And that will come in handy when we're looking at sight words. Okay. So here are brain scans. This is I got this from Shaywitz and Shaywitz, who are researchers at Yale, who have a whole dyslexia at the Brain Institute. This is what a normal reader does. These are the parts that light up when they're calling it a normal reader or a typical reader read. So you see the parts I was just talking about, the visual area here in the back of the brain, the occipital lobes, the logical mathematical area here, and then the verbal area or the language area, Broca's area. So these three light up. We have readers that are reading in a conventional way. Right? They have learned to read like most of the kids in the school. So maybe 75% of readers operate like this. So if I'm going to take you through the typical process of decoding a word, suppose you see the word sheep. So here you are in the visual area, and the word is sheep, and your logical mathematical area then takes it apart into the graphemes, I guess, the graphemes that correspond to the sounds. So SH would be sh, and then EE would be E, and then P would be p. And then you use your language area to pronounce the word sheep, right? And you say, oh, I know that word. And you think sheep, and there's your brain gets a picture of a sheep. That's a little simplified, I guess, but you get the idea, right? This is the process. So what happens with these three types of readers who are not reading normally, who are not learning to read in a normal way? So here is a brain scan of somebody with an adult with dyslexia, and you see there's something missing here. So when they're trying to read, their visual area lights up, right? So this is their word recognition area, and their verbal area lights up. So the language area lights up, but not the analytic part. This is totally blank. Right? They're not using their logical mathematical intelligence. Instead, they're using things over here on the right side of the brain, which is where I said that word recognition was. So how are they processing language generally. Well, let's look. If you have somebody in your class who you suspect might have dyslexia or hereditary of some kind of learning difficulty, here are a bunch of clues. Again, I can't say this is a diagnostic or dispositive. It's your tendencies you might have seen. So a big clue is that if the frequent sight words are words that are not necessarily regular, are not pronounced in a predictable way, and most of these are very common words like the, or maybe his, or words that love, so words that are not spelled the way they sound and don't sound the way that they're spelled. And these students, both these English language learners and the native speakers that I work with at Washington Washington Literacy, have this very interesting, almost paradoxical result on their assessments. So if a word is completely regular and you ought to be able to decode it beautifully, like rub, nevertheless, if it's an unfamiliar word, they will have a harder time recognizing it and saying what it is than a frequent sight word like the. What you will also find is that they are looking at the whole word, and so words that have similar shapes or common letters, they will substitute one for the other, whichever one they're thinking of. So if they see the word expensive, it might come out as experience, or something similar, of a similar length, as similar letters. Another very interesting thing that can happen is that they will look at a word and they will substitute a totally different word that has a similar meaning. So I had a student who was looking at the word sheep and she said lamb. Now, yes, I mean, she got the idea, right? And we were talking about, I think it was The Boy Who Cried Wolf, right? So, we had the animals involved, but if she had been decoding this word, there was no way she could get lamb out of sheep. Okay. So again, she's looking at the whole word and not necessarily doing any kind of phonological decoding at all. When she's spelling a familiar word, she would, even her own name, she would mix up the letters, or her address. She couldn't get the spell it right. Something that was very frustrating for her and for the teacher was that she would take, very carefully going through decoding a word syllable by syllable, and she would then finally she would read the word. Okay, now I know this word. Then the next line would have the same word in it, and she'd have to start all over again. So it was as if she hadn't learned anything from that first pass through, and that just drove her crazy. And she would, say, "Oh, I'm so stupid. Oh, I forget. What's wrong with me? I know that word." But the point of being able to decode the words is that you don't have to know them. You can read the meaning even if you don't know the word, right? You don't have to memorize the way it looks in order to be able to say what it is. Another thing, again, this is a tendency. A lot of these students are left-handed, and that tends to go with a more right brain dominance than right-handed students. Don't count on that. Don't say, "Oh, well, she's not left-handed, therefore she can't have this," or "She's left-handed, maybe she has dyslexia." But it's just a tendency. Okay, you're more likely to see left-handers in this category. So this is what's going on with the sheep and lamb problem. Here she is. We are in the back of the brain here, occipital lobe. We've recognized the word sheep, and we're recognizing by its shape. So we're looking at it not as a sequence of letters or as a sequence of graphemes, but as a pattern, like an artistic painting, a photograph. And this is how many people with dyslexia have been able to get through school up, in fact, up until the third grade. This is a very, this is actually a very efficient way of reading, because all you have to do is recognize the word, and then you know what it is, and you don't have to go through all this decoding business. Sheep. Why not just say sheep, and then you got it, right? The problem is when you get to third grade, you get longer words, and you get more words than will fit into your brain to memorize. That's when dyslexia starts to be less efficient, less adaptive, and often students have to go back to square one and keep their brain from volunteering all the sight words that they already know, to give their analytic part of their brain time to decode word. So she sees the shape of this word, and she's not decoding it, but she's thinking of a sheep, right? And it's just that she happens to say lamb instead of sheep, but she got the meaning, but she didn't get the word, right? So and so we've completely bypassed the analytic part. We're not using phone, I guess you could call it the phonic method of reading at all. She's treating this more like as if it were a single character in Chinese, say. Okay, now, student type 2, pronunciation problems. We've seen this mostly in languages that have a phonology that's so different from English that there are all kinds of mergers taking place that make the word that they're saying very different from the English version. Okay, so what they're producing and what they're hearing themselves say sounds very different from the way an English speaker would say it. So typical languages that have rules like this might be Thai, Vietnamese, Mandarin, Korean. So my student, and actually Jesse's student too, student T, was a speaker of Thai. And when we first worked with her, nobody could understand what she said. And she'd been in, she'd been at Washington English for years, but, you know, she wasn't getting anywhere, not just with speaking, but also with reading. So the kinds of differences that will cause this problem are mergers of English distinctions. So if they merge R and L, for example, or tense vowels like ship and sheep, or suppose they can't pronounce consonant clusters, then when they produce the word, it might have more syllables, or missing sounds, or something like that, or the final consonant might drop out altogether, or it might turn into a glottal stop. So things that are outside of the rules of English that are difficult for an English listener to undo and figure out what the speaker is thinking. Now, these students may be literate in their native language. Their native language might be alphabetic. It might, well, none of these. Well, like I said, I guess Vietnamese uses the Latin writing system, but so they have it's an alphabetic system. They understand that a symbol represents a sound, so they get it. They understand what the reading is for. They understand that what they say is represented by these symbols. It's just that when they try to produce it, it doesn't come out as something they can identify. So my favorite example of this was that we were sounding out the word rub. Okay, so we would, okay, first sound second sound last sound b, rub. Okay, so she said rub, and I said yes. It's, it means this, right? And I rubbed my arm, and she said rub. Oh, you mean like I rub you? I rub you? I rub you? And I don't, what do you mean I rub you? Oh, love. I love you. Oh, I get it. But she was saying rub, and to her it was not any different from the word love, and those two words were just completely merging, right? The same thing might happen if you have a student whose language does not distinguish between tense and lax vowels. So sheep versus ship, they may read sheep, but not know, is it the animal or is it the boat, right? They don't know which one it is, because their brain does not distinguish those two sounds. So which one is it? So this is how what's going on in the brain for this kind of reader. You start with the word sheep, you decode it into graphemes. So the same way a typical reader would, who knows English. So you've got the sheep, and then their brain tries to pronounce it, but is it sheep or is it ship? Or maybe they sound the same to you. So that's where it gets confused. So is it this animal over here, or is it this boat down there? I don't know which. I'll have to keep reading to see if the context helps me decide. And with rub, it turns out that the context worked for both. So I rub you is a little bit odd, but it could work. Right? So that's what's going on with these readers who are having issues with literacy. Type 3 is the third type of invisible student. This was the one that was the weirdest for me. I was expecting the phonological issues. I was expecting dyslexia because I'd seen it before. This was completely new to me, and it's something that most teachers aren't even aware of. But if you're dealing with, if you're working with students who are refugees or who are recent immigrants, or even who come from parts of the world where, well, a large proportion of my students who have never had any reading, any schooling, are not literate in their native language. A lot of them are women who were not allowed to go to school. So their brothers may have been sent to school, but they were not permitted to go to school. So I'm from Africa, from parts of Asia. And I also had a Maasai student who, in his culture at Tanzania, you don't go to school. You go out and you herd the cattle with the rest of your adolescent cohort, and that's what you learn how to do. And that, that's the important thing you have to know how to do. So when he came to my class, his English actually was pretty good. He was married to a speaker of English, and he his English was I would say intermediate level, but no reading at all. And a lot of my my difficulty teaching this kind of student was that the assumptions that we naturally make as teachers and as participants in this literate culture are things that are not innate. They're culturally they're culturally acquired, but we must have acquired them so early we don't remember learning them. So, for example, one problem I had with the students was, suppose I say, put your name at the top of the page. Right? Put your name at the top of the page. Where would you put it if you had a piece of paper? Most of us would say, well, this is the top of the page. But if you're looking at it flat on the table, the top of the page is actually this whole surface, and where you're supposed to put your name is the part that's furthest away from you. Okay, how do you know that? Well, we have a metaphor that things that are a page that's lying flat on a table can be transformed into a vertical page, and then that's at the top. The part that's furthest away from you transforms into the part that is vertically higher. But when I would tell my students to put their name at the top of the page, these students did not know what that meant, and they would just be baffled, like, or put the date at the bottom of the page. You'd be looking underneath the page. How do you do that, right? My Maasai student he was very angry or upset or confused because I kept saying, well, let's look at the end of the word, or put the plural, put the S at the end of the word for a plural, or don't forget the consonant at the end of the word. And finally he says, I don't understand end of the word. What do you mean end of the word? Which end? I said, wait a minute. I'm talking about not, the word having two ends like a line segment, but rather the beginning versus the end. He said, well, how do you know which one is first? I said, oh, okay, well, there's a metaphor that we use that when we talk, the part of the word that leaves your mouth first is the beginning. And then the part of the word that leaves your mouth last is the end. He said, well, okay, then now I understand. But it was necessary to be very explicit about this assumption that we were making in order for him to even understand what we were talking about, having a common metalinguistic or metaliterary vocabulary. Another issue is that maybe they learned the alphabet okay, although no, I won't get into that. That's I'll ask me later. A's and G's are a problem. Ask me later. But they had a lot of trouble with textbooks or other kinds of two-dimensional representations of things. Maps were very difficult. Drawings of the Bob books that have little cartoons that have triangles and circles and squares as characters, or Sam and Pat. Sam and Pat is everybody's favorite literary text from the 50s, and those have line drawings also, and they could not relate to that. Even photographs were difficult. So and when we played bingo, this caused a lot of arguments in the class. So bingo, you can get five in a row, right? Well, we're assuming that 5 in a row means in a straight line that goes either vertically or horizontally, or possibly diagonally, and not one that winds all around the square. But nobody told these students that 5 in a row meant a straight line, right? So they would have a curvy line, and everybody said, "No, you're cheating," right? Both of these students, I had the woman from Sudan and the man from Tanzania would write everything down that I put on the board, would write everything down that they saw in the book, would write everything down just automatically, until they were, I had the feeling that they were copying things so diligently that they weren't paying attention to what I was saying or learning anything about the language. I finally wound up having to pull the pencils out of their hands sometimes, and even so, they would sneak underneath the table and write down things. What they had was they were doing the it's surface versus depth. I guess you'd have to say they were doing the cosmetic parts of reading without knowing why they were doing it. So they thought that being able to write the letters and copy these things over, that was something that a reader does. So why am I keeping you from doing that? But it was because they weren't understanding why they were doing it. They might copy everything down, but I say, okay, now read that back to me, and they would not be able to do that. They didn't know what they were writing. Or I would say, okay, now we're decoding the word sheep. Okay, now what is that? And I don't know. Right? It would not. They could pronounce sheep. They could decode it fine, but it would not mean anything to them. So this is the process that they were undergoing. So they see the word sheep. Now they know how to separate the digraphs. They pronounce sheep. And even if they know the word sheep, it doesn't mean anything when written down. So they have a disconnect between the writing and the meaning of the object. So what do we do about that? So how do we identify what's going on here? How can we even tell which of these problems they have? Maybe they have more than one, right? And as I said, trying to diagnose, official diagnosis of dyslexia in a language that they don't know that and can't read. How could you possibly do that anyway? Can we get them to the point that they can enter a traditional ESL program? So can they come back to Washington English and then make progress, right? How can we help them? Can we put them all in one class? Well, maybe not, but that's where they wound up, right? So I had them all in one class, and actually it's just as well, because trying to diagnose them ahead of time might not have been successful. So let me give you an idea of the kinds of things that seem to have worked. So number one, textbook issues. I asked how many of you use a textbook with your beginning classes, and there's two problems with using a textbook from the get-go. If you're using a textbook, this is what Washington English was using at the time. I think they're using a different one, a different system now. But any intro textbook is going to have the same problem. You're going to have frequent useful words. You're going to have words from your daily life, words from the classroom, and they're all irregular, so you can't sound any of them out. These are all words that are sadly disappointing. If this were Spanish, learning to read would be much easier, right? But English has enough irregular words, especially the common words, that you might as well just learn them by shape, like the students who learn them as sight words. If you look at the Washington literacy curriculum, if we use the Wilson method, very, very strict consonant, vowel, consonant type structure. All of the words are completely regular. Any words that are not regular have to be, very, very common sight words, and the rest have to be decodable, which means, number one, you get really boring sentences and stories, and you get lots of weird words. So fig, lad, hut, sag, rid, keg, tot, shun. These are words that don't appear in your normal English vocabulary, and I really don't want to get up and illustrate, jig or whatever the word is, when it's not a word they're ever going to use anyway. But they can decode it. But it why would they need it? So what can you do about that? After much trial and error, we started out with no textbook at first, instead working on the oral language and the vocabulary first. We taught the symbols and the sounds, and that helped the students who had dyslexia increase their phonological awareness. But also, we worked from the top down, and rather than using worksheets or doing any reading at all, actually, we used three-dimensional items, lots of manipulables, and we acted things out. Okay. We did a lot of language experience student stories. So this is what was the most amazing thing. It was when students started to write their own stories and make their own books, and we would delve deep into those. We would mine them for whatever we could get. That made the biggest difference for my type 3 students, connecting the language with the reading, or speech with writing, and explicitly teaching the literacy conventions like top of the page, how to do tables, and so forth. So here's more about how we developed the decodable vocabulary. So we did not just single words, but whole chunks. We did songs. We had a class menagerie, lots of little realia that we talked about, and they did things. And we introduced the spelling and the reading after they had the words. Here's a picture of our menagerie. So you see lots of decodable words: a rock, a duck, a bus. Let's see, a cow, a rose, a kazoo, right? So a band. Let's see, I don't know about the elephant, egg, a fish. Okay, so we had lots of things, and we would put the lollipop under the napkin. The duck is on the truck. I mean, lots of things that we could actually act out and manipulate, as well as doing lots of narratives. Like they would all act out the boy who cried wolf, or they would all act out uh, Goldilocks. That was wild. So also working on phonological awareness for the not just the students with dyslexia, but also the ones with pronunciation issues. So mouth awareness, how to segment the word, how to connect speech so that people can understand you, and so forth. Yeah, so we made sentences, we had them act them out. They would tell, write, and read their own stories using the decodable vocabulary that I just introduced. But also, we would do field trips. We would take photos of an activity, or something would happen and they would come and talk about it. They would tell the story, they would make a book, and we would have a glossary, and we would talk about it a long time. So here's student generated story, my Thai student. So at night, I put a light on my head. I go to the rubber trees. I take my knife. I cut the bark on 1,000 trees, and so forth and so on. And these are her words, and this is her story. And then she illustrated it afterwards, and then she made a book. And here's a field trip we took. Our class walks to the park. Okay, so we went to the park. We took pictures. They put them in order. They made captions. They all got a book to take home. And this student here finally got it. She would read this book to herself over and over and over again, and she finally got the relationship between the reading and the story. So I was really excited about that. So so students are talking on the phone in English. That's a big deal because that's hard. They're more aware of text outside the classroom. So now they see signs. They're aware of signs. They have increased literacy awareness. Before they ignored ads and street signs. They know all their letters. That was explicitly taught. The digraphs, they explicitly were taught that. They can read and write short sentences. Now they're not that interesting, but if put the duck on the truck, and then they can do it, right? I mean, that is communication finally, and they can decode regular words even if they're not words that they're familiar with visually. So I was very, very happy with the result, but it took a long time to get to that, and it was the writing the text of their own speech that really made the connection. So that is, I think I'm done.
Great, Dr. Barr, thank you so much. I think we have time for just a few questions.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about it.
Great. There's one in the chat. I can read it out if you want.
Yes, please.
All right. Helene Marshall asked, did you find that the ones with pronunciation problems helped the ones with dyslexia and vice versa?
Oh,
or
yeah.
that both of those groups helped third group with the conceptual part of reading? In other words, was there peer-to-peer assistance and collaboration?
There was lots of peer assistance and collaboration. I have to say that the peer assistance between the students who had literacy in their native language and the students who were pre-literate or had low literacy awareness was not helpful. They would just say, okay, they would point, say, okay, put your name here, right? I mean, it wasn't, they didn't understand what the problem was. Well, we didn't either. As the teachers didn't understand what the problem was either until we finally realized, oh my gosh, there are all these assumptions and metaphors that we've had since we were, 4, that we don't remember learning, that these people don't have. And we need to include that first before we can even start to talk about reading. But yes, the pronunciation, especially once I showed them that listening harder was not going to help. If they say no, it's lake, rake, that's not going to get anywhere. But if they were helpful, if they said no, put your tongue out further, that was something that that seemed to translate. And especially we use the color vowel system, so they say no, this is a red word, not a green word. So it's I can't even think of the word. It's head, not heed. Okay, something like that. Any other questions? I mean, I could go on all night. I'm happy to Paula has a question. At least she's raising her hand. Paula?
Yes, I don't have a question. I'm very interested in having access to the slides.
Oh yes, I'll be happy to put it up. I'll definitely put it up, and I have some examples of the student-generated stories too, if you want to see those.
Yeah,
as well.
My other comment might be the phonetic rules. I've used them. I've been teaching ESL 1 and 2 for a few years, and I've had students from Central and South America mostly, but some of them, English is their third language, or the second language, but the first language is not Spanish. They have a native.
Right.
And I find them very interesting because usually they have, they can learn faster.
Yeah.
Because they have more range in their hearing system and recognizing
because they know 2 languages, not just 1. Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. So they have the more languages, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other part is I've used some method that has been super effective, and in a program called Reading Horizons, where I myself was not aware as a teacher that I was like, where was this when I was learning English? But it's a way to it's a pattern on the phonetic skills, how to recognize long and short vowels. And that was some revolutionary also to help the students read with the correct decoding
right
skills. So I'm very interested in having access to what you have, because right now I'm working specifically in identifying learning challenges for our students.
Yes.
And I'm working with adult students. I've been working with.
Yes. Yeah, I would be very interested in hearing more about what you're doing, because it's a dilemma. I mean, not many people work on this in this area, and it's true there are not that many students who are in this position, but there are enough of them that it's not fair that they should be left behind. Okay.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. The students have skills that if we use them right, they can actually progress faster.
Right.
But
it's not impossible. Yeah.
No, and we
it's
have
slower,
skills,
but it's not impossible. Yeah.
No, and I think it's just knowledge. We have to learn how to work with them and get trained by people that has experience with this type of students and situations like you. And so that's why I want to have access to the slides, because I
have a lot I can put up. Yeah.
Okay.
Stuff by Patsy Vinogradov also deals with students that are pre-literate. Carol, you had a question. Carol Woodside, you had your hand up. Or somebody else. It's all crystal clear. Nothing is left to chance. You know everything. You understood everything I said. There's nothing left to know. Okay, William.
So basically, you took the 3 groups and you created a class that worked for all 3 by taking into account the risk factors for each one.
Yes, and it turned out that they were all helped by some similar things. So they were all helped by phonological awareness, or at least 2 out of the 3 were helped with phonological awareness, and I think the third was too. They were all helped by the LEA method of writing their own stories. That made a big difference. That made a bigger difference than I expected. There are lots of other things that I might do with each individual group, but working with a class as a whole, I found that it was helpful to do just these common things was enough to get them over the hump a little bit. So I saw somebody raising their hand. Yes, I will definitely be posting the slides on the discussion board, and I'm happy to have a further discussion with people as well, because I would love to know. I did not give them CASAS scores, CASAS tests. Still no CASAS tests. Yeah. Yeah. That not. We did work on test taking though. So that was a real trip. Just, you know, circle the answer. Wow, that was a metaphor that took some explicit teaching, right? These are things that, you know, in first grade we learn how to do that, but they didn't know what to do with in a test. They didn't know that they were supposed to answer the question that was right above the answer. They were answering a question that was over on the other page. You know, I mean, why not, right? Holly.
Hi, I wondered how your students fared during the pandemic online.
Really not well. That's why I have not been keeping the classes. They had enough technical problems. We had a couple of meetings toward the beginning of the pandemic, but they all had to have help from their kids, right? And that got unwieldy. So I really miss them, and we're hoping to start up in person again, maybe January. I don't know, but it's something. I mean, I feel like I've let them down, but I'm hoping that they've found ways of studying, and we've been able to find some volunteer tutors for them in the meantime. But it's not the same.
No, the reason I asked is because we, in the school where I work, we have a number of students who have some of these problems, and the whole virtual world just did not work well for them at all.
Oh yeah, you know, trying to translate things into what it looks like on a screen, moving
Yes.
things, mousing.
Yes.
Oh golly, and not just that, but it's so difficult. It's a lot of what I do is very physical.
Yes.
Okay, so a lot of it is, you know, moving your hands in the same way that your tongue is moving. So vowel yoga is what we call it, and you know, jumping around the room and leaping out the window like Goldilocks. I mean, these are things that stick in their head, right? When we act out the stories, and it makes a big difference not being able to do that in person. So
not being able to point at things and put your finger on something, just even something so
not being
simple.
able to touch the manipulables. I mean,
Yes.
that was the whole point of my having all these little animals, was that they could pick them up and hand them to each other and do things with them. And now they're two-dimensional again. It's just I'm very frustrated about that, and I'm sad that I haven't been able to work with them.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to soon.
I hope so. Other questions?
I think we can take one more if there's one more, and then at 3:30 we'll be starting the closing ceremony in this room with WATESOL announcements and prizes. But yeah, one more question from anyone for Dr. Barr?
Okay. Thank you all, and I hope to hear from you again if you have questions or if you have experience with these groups. I would like to know what has gone on with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Barr, for an excellent presentation.
So Jesse, we can just stay in here for closing ceremonies?
Yes. Yeah, I'll stop this recording.